The air is heavy with stillness. Not the silence after peace, but the silence that hides beneath war, the breath the world takes before it lies. You're standing between land and sea. To your west, London hums in blackout. To your east, the Channel glimmers under a thin mist. Somewhere below your feet, the ground vibrates with the sound of engines you can't see. Above you, clouds drift like unspoken thoughts. Before you drift off, take a moment to subscribe, but only if stories told in whispers are your kind of thing. And leave a comment letting us know. Where are you listening from? Let us keep these stories alive. You're listening to Echoes of War. It's 1943. The war has grown tired of blood and now turns to imagination. In the basements of Whitehall, men in uniforms speak of ghosts as if they were soldiers. Maps whisper of armies that don't exist. And somewhere, in a cold room under a single bulb, a body waits to be reborn into fiction. The corpse has no name yet, only the faint echo of a life forgotten, a man whose death will become a weapon. A photograph will give him love, letters will give him purpose. His heart no longer beats, but his story will move nations. Soon, he will drift through salt water carrying lies wrapped in truth. The Germans will read his words. Hitler himself will believe them, and thousands will live because one man could not. You turn your head toward the sea. The tide curls and unfolds, patient as memory. Somewhere beyond that horizon, another illusion is gathering, not in the depths, but in the fields. In the counties of Kent and Sussex, tents rise from empty meadows. Men build tanks from rubber and wood. Painters stain canvas with false shadows so that from the air, an army seems to breathe. A voice crackles through the static of a wireless set. Transmitting. Division strength confirmed. But no division exists. Only signal, wind, and belief. Two fictions, one of flesh, one of air, moving toward each other across time. The corpse and the ghost. Operation Mincemeat and Operation Fortitude. Deceptions so audacious they would alter the course of history. You close your eyes and listen. Beneath the hum of the city lies the rhythm of creation. The typewriter's click, the scratch of pen against map, the soft folding of paper into envelope. Ordinary sounds turned sacred by purpose. Somewhere, a young woman seals a letter that will never reach its reader. Somewhere else, a general rehearses a speech to soldiers who will never exist. The war has found a new kind of courage, the courage to invent. For in this quiet theatre of shadows, courage is not the act of killing, but of convincing, and belief is the sharpest weapon of all. You walk through this world unseen, through tunnels smelling of metal and mildew, past desks stacked with forms stamped most secret, through an airfield where a single real plane sits among dozens of fabric shells. Everywhere, illusion hums like electricity. You sense its pulse, its precision, its strange mercy. A lie, if built carefully enough, can save the living. That is the gospel of these men, and soon of an entire generation. A voice echoes from a corridor behind you, calm, clipped, British. If the enemy must believe, let him believe completely. The sentence fades, swallowed by the rhythm of typewriter keys. Outside, a lorry rumbles through fog, headlights dimmed. Somewhere in that fog, the truth is being rewritten. The sea and the wind conspire. Paper and ink become soldiers. It's a war fought without faces, a war where silence kills and imagination commands. You pause at the edge of the docks. A seagull drifts overhead, its cry lost in the rolling surf. Far below, the water glows faintly from the lights of submarines preparing for departure. Somewhere among them lies a canister and a body, ready to vanish into legend. Soon, his story will touch every coast of Europe, and as he sinks into the Atlantic's dark cradle, another army, made of nothing but air, will begin to march. Two lies, bound by a single truth: that victory, sometimes, belongs not to those who fight, but to those who imagine. The wind changes. You breathe it in, the taste of salt, oil, and rain. The faint sound of Morse code drifts from a nearby ship. Dot, dash, dot. The rhythm of faith disguised as information. A voice inside you whispers. The war's greatest weapons were never guns, but stories. You open your eyes one last time before the journey begins. The sea stretches ahead like an open book. The fields behind you wait like blank pages. Both will be written in deception, courage, and grief. Both will prove that imagination can be as fatal and as beautiful as fire. Now, let the tide pull you under. Let the wind guide you inland. Let the quiet teach you how truth dissolves. Chapter 1. The Spark of a Lie. The war had entered its middle age, that tired season when men stopped believing in endings. London, 1943. The air itself feels weary, worn down by 3 years of fear and rationed hope. You walk through the fog and smell the city's exhaustion: coal smoke, wet paper, the faint scent of burnt sugar drifting from an empty cafe. Every sound feels measured: boots on pavement, the echo of a distant siren, the crackle of wireless static announcing somewhere else's tragedy. In the heart of Westminster, behind stone walls and blackout curtains, another kind of war is being fought, one that leaves no craters, no smoke. A war of paper, whispers, and imagination. Down narrow stairwells and into windowless rooms, men of the XX Committee gather around long oak tables littered with files. Their enemy is truth itself. Typewriters clatter like machine guns. Cigarette smoke curls through the air, coiling around maps pinned with colored strings: North Africa, Sicily, Greece. Each pin marks not just territory, but possibility. It is here, in these subterranean chambers, that the world learns to weaponize belief. Ewan Montague sits at the table's end, jacket slightly rumpled, eyes sharp behind round spectacles. Beside him, Charles Chumley, tall, awkward, brilliant in that eccentric British way, flips through reports from the Abwehr, Germany's military intelligence. Between them, on a sheet of paper, a single phrase: the Trout Memo. It was written months before by Admiral John Godfrey, but its ghost still lingers here, a curious document comparing deception to fishing. The trout fisherman casts patiently and waits for the enemy to take the bait. Most read it as a metaphor. Montague reads it as a blueprint. He taps the page lightly, eyes unfocused, as if seeing something behind the words. Chumley leans in, catching the glint of an idea. "What if the bait were real?" he says quietly. Montague looks up. "Real. A body," Chumley replies, "dressed as an officer. Documents in his pocket. A plane crash. A tragedy, believable enough to fool anyone who finds him." The room goes still. A strange silence hangs in the air, not disbelief, but intrigue. The kind of silence that falls when imagination dares to trespass into the unthinkable. Montague's first reaction isn't revulsion, it's curiosity. You can almost see the cogs of logic turning behind his eyes: how it could be done, what it would cost, what it might save. He speaks softly, like a man afraid of scaring off a fragile thought. If we could plant the right papers, and ensure they reach the right hands. Chumley nods. It would have to be perfect. A life so ordinary it feels true. The others murmur. Someone laughs uneasily. Someone else mutters, "Morbid business." But no one stops them, because beneath the shock, There's an undeniable truth. The idea could work. You linger by the door, watching the birth of a lie that will change the course of the war. The men don't know it yet, but this moment, this quiet, smoke-filled moment, will ripple through time. They are midwives to a deception that will save tens of thousands, and haunt them for years. Montague leans back in his chair, thinking of logistics. A body. Where to find one? How to preserve it? How to make it believable? How to ensure it washes ashore where the Germans will see it? He sketches a rough plan in pencil, his handwriting small and deliberate. Operation Mincemeat. The name means nothing now, absurd, almost comic, but within months it will become sacred among the secret world's faithful. A legend of invisible hands and calculated mercy. Outside, rain drums softly against the glass. The city above continues its nightly masquerade, lights dimmed, hearts cautious, every window covered in fear. No one up there knows that the next great weapon of the war has just been imagined. Later that night, Montague walks home along the embankment. The Thames moves sluggishly under the bridges, its surface reflecting the occasional flicker of passing headlights. He pauses by the railing, thinking of the men dying in Tunisia, the endless logistics of invasion. War has become mathematics, numbers of ships, calories, men, and yet, here he is, contemplating illusion. He lights a cigarette, watches the ember glow against the fog, and murmurs to himself, "We fight with ghosts now." The thought unsettles him. He doesn't know if that's progress or decay. Behind him, Big Ben strikes midnight. The city exhales. A train whistles somewhere beyond the river. And below, unseen currents carry the tide toward the south, toward Spain, toward destiny. The following morning, the XX committee reconvenes. Their brief: to formalize the impossible. Montague stands before the group, his voice low, deliberate. We need a man who died by accident, not in battle, not by violence. Someone unclaimed. He must be believable, ordinary enough to be invisible, but not so plain he's unremarkable. Chumley adds, "We'll create a complete identity, family, rank, correspondence, even theatre tickets in his pocket." A secretary in the corner hesitates before speaking. And his name. Montague glances at her. Major William Martin, Royal Marines. Let's make him real. The name lands like a heartbeat. Something human, something inevitable. You can feel the room shift. The unease gives way to fascination. The air buzzes with the energy of creation. Scientists building a myth, craftsmen forging a ghost. The war has found its poets again. Montague makes notes as the plan expands. The body must be delivered near Huelva, Spain, where German agents thrive under the pretense of neutrality. It must appear accidental, a plane crash at sea. The briefcase chained to his wrist must contain letters between Allied commanders, suggesting a diversion, an invasion of Greece and Sardinia instead of Sicily. A simple falsehood, dressed as tragedy. The table fills with details. A letter from Pam, his fiancée. A used ticket from a London club. A bank statement. Cigarettes. A key. A pencil stub. A life built backwards, from the pockets outward. At one point, Chumley remarks, half to himself, "We're not making a lie. We're making a person." And that's when you understand the brilliance of it and its quiet horror. For every truth the war destroys, men like these create a better fiction to take its place. You watch them shaping it with reverence, not cynicism. They believe in the story they're building, and that belief is what will make it work. Hours later, The corridors empty. Montague remains, surrounded by files. He removes his glasses and rubs his eyes. On the desk before him lies a single photograph, a young woman smiling, head tilted, eyes alive. She doesn't know that her face will soon belong to someone who never lived. He sets it down gently beside the new name, Major William Martin. Outside, the rain has stopped. The night smells of metal and damp paper. A lorry passes, headlights briefly illuminating the wall where the map of Europe hangs. Lines and pins, all the places where men will die, or not, because of what is being written here. Montague stares at the map. He traces a finger across the sea between England and Spain. For the first time, he imagines it, the corpse adrift, the waves carrying it toward destiny. He feels a chill that isn't from the weather. "If this works," he whispers, "it will be the kindest lie we ever told." In the corridor outside, the janitor hums a tune as he empties a bin. Somewhere far below, a train rattles through a tunnel. London moves on, unaware of the new weapon forming in its veins. The war above is fought with bombs. The war below is fought with belief. And belief, as Montague has just discovered, is infinitely more dangerous. "A lie," he writes later in his notebook, "is only immoral if it fails." The ink dries. The page closes. The first spark of Operation Mincemeat has been lit. The room falls silent except for the ticking clock, patient, mechanical, impartial. It's counting down to the moment when truth itself will drown, quietly, for victory. Chapter 2. The Man Who Never Was. Part 1. The Cold Light. London breathes in grey. You step into a room that smells of phenol and winter. White tile to the ceiling, a single bulb trembling, metal trays softly chiming when moved. Time here is disciplined by thermometers and clipboards, by the slow stutter of a wall clock whose tick lands like a judge's gavel. Ewan Montague stands with his hands inside his coat sleeves. He watches the pathologist lift a corner of the sheet. There is the face, pale, softened by the brief humiliations of death, mouth surrendered, lashes clumped like wet threads. Ordinary, ageless, a man you'd never have noticed on a bus, a man the world allowed to drift past without learning his name, a voice practiced and unstartled, male, mid-30s, ingestion poisoning, minimal trauma. Sir Bernard Spilsbury doesn't look up from the form. His sentences are as tidy as the metal instruments gleaming beside him. He explains what the sea will do, and what it cannot, how lungs hold stories, how skin remembers the temperature of a room, how even in death the body has a grammar that can betray a lie. Montague nods. He is a barrister by training. Evidence is his religion. He knows juries, how they weigh the tilt of a wrist, the crack in a voice. Now he must prepare a case for an audience he will never face, the enemy. The sheet falls back. Silence returns, heavy as frost. There are papers to sign that none of them will keep. There are arrangements that will float between offices on Whisper and Nord, a certificate that will not be filed, an authorization that will not be archived. The body will remain in official limbo, because limbo is safer than light. You watch Spilsbury's pencil trace a quiet permission across the page. A life is requisitioned. Anonymous death becomes state material. In another room, a steel canister waits with its lid open like an unblinking eye. Dry ice smokes along the rim, curling down the sides in slow ribbons. Someone has stenciled a lie across its face. Optical instruments. It will be the most honest thing about it. An instrument, yes, for seeing into another mind. The door closes against the cold. The bulb hums. The room resumes its patient chore of forgetting. Outside, London receives a thin snow that will not last. Part 2. The Making of Major William Martin. You descend into an office where paper possesses gravity, where livelihoods, backstories, affections grow from the edges inward, a life drafted in abbreviations and T-rings. On the table, a wallet with nothing in it yet, a St. Christopher medal whose metal holds the day's chill, a silver pencil, a key without a door, 2 shillings and a 6pence rubbed thin at the Queen's face. Beside them, a sheet with a name written neatly in ink. Major William Martin, Royal Marines. Names are doors. This one opens smoothly, without splinter. Montague studies it the way a craftsman runs a hand along timber, searching for flaw. The rank must fit the plausible center, not so high as to invite portraits and dinner lists, not so low as to deny access to important paper. Major feels like a coat that warms without boasting. Across from him, Charles Chumley is arranging the mundane with almost priestly care. He repeats a principle the two of them have learned like liturgy. The enemy trusts the ordinary. Not seals or signatures, but lint in a pocket, a theatre stub with a coffee ring, a letter whose ink has blotted where the writer hesitated. A woman steps into the room with the unceremonious grace of competence. Jean Leslie. Hair pinned, blouse practical. She places a small photograph on the table. Her own face, borrowed. The smile is not stage-managed, simply a moment that survived light and chemistry. The photograph will live in a breast pocket where it can be found by hands that are not kind. Pam, Montague says softly, as if the syllable might run if spoken too loud. Jean sits at the typewriter. The keys begin their warm weather. Click, click, shiver, click. She knows this letter must be as unremarkable as fog and twice as real. She chooses the simple sorcery of lovers. I miss you. I saw a hat in a window that would suit me if you'd object less to the price. I will keep your place at the dinner you promised to attend and did not. A smudge of lipstick at the bottom edge, a fold pressed by fingers that needed something to hold. Chumley assembles the pocket litter, a bill from a gentleman's club whose charges suggest someone neither frugal nor careless, a bank letter observing politely that an account has strayed into overdraft, a reused envelope with a penciled shopping list inside, razor blades, matches, stamps. The briefcase receives letters between flag officers, written in the truant language of busy men. The memos are built from quiet inaccuracies that become their most convincing truths, a wrong form of address that only 2 friends would use, a date just misremembered enough to feel human, a joke about liver paste tucked into a margin. You stand near the window and listen to rain argue with the glass. In the corners of the room, coats steam gently. The radiator ticks like a distant metronome marking out caution. Montague lifts the identity card under a magnifying glass. The photograph they have chosen, not too crisp, not dear. The stamp lands imperfectly, ink feathering at its rim. He breathes. Perfection is the enemy of belief. They age the ID with a thumb rubbed against the edge, a brief kiss of ash from the cigarette tray. The leather wallet receives the card. The pocket receives the wallet. The jacket receives the medal. The briefcase receives its lies as carefully as a tabernacle receives its bread. When it is done, they do not speak. A hush that belongs to altars and operating rooms settles. Will he like jazz? Jean asks, half smiling. Terribly, Montague answers, not smiling at all. He writes the last small entries in a notebook that will be found later, perhaps read by eyes that have not slept. Appointment, Taylor, 14:30. Oh, Peter, 5 shillings. Pam's birthday. Remember, the ordinary has never felt so sacred. Part 3. The Weight of Borrowed Life. He is dressed carefully, not lavished. Shirt stiff enough to have been ironed by someone in a hurry. Collar correct. The Royal Marines badge sits where it should, no brighter than any other man's. Buttons that do not clamour. Polished shoes that still remember an older mud. In the morgue, the body is as dignified as their caution permits. A comb drags through hair not his. The hands are arranged. A ring chosen for discretion. You note the small kindnesses that no report will mention. The way a medical attendant straightens a cuff. The way a clerk refuses to set her teacup anywhere near the body. Spilsbury murmurs instructions with the calm of a man who has taught unthinkable lessons for years. What the sea must be allowed to tell. What must be denied. The lungs, the sinuses, the chemistry of skin left to a certain air for a certain time. How long the cold can preserve the lie. How much warmth will endanger it. It is macabre work performed with the grammar of decency. No one hurries. No one lingers. At the final inspection, Ewan Montague stands alone for a moment. The room emits its reliable liturgy of sounds, a trolley's small squeal, the sigh of ice. He looks not at the face, but at the chest where the photograph waits. Pam smiles in the dark. What did Journeyman Michael believe as he walked toward the edge of his life? Hunger narrows belief to a point. The city is an animal that does not apologize. He fell through it, namelessly, and now the nation that did not see him will arm him with consequence. You feel the moral seam beneath your feet, the place the floorboards give because the house is old. Montague feels it too. The room is honest enough to allow it. He is not sentimental, merely awake. He sets a hand lightly against the fabric at the shoulder, as if steadying a fellow passenger on a moving train. It's an impulse without audience or reward. "Forgive me," he whispers, and the room refuses to answer because rooms are made of patience, not pity. The chain is fitted to the wrist. The briefcase lock click is very small, but the sound lands with a legal finality that belongs to verdicts. Paper and flesh are married. The lie receives its sacrament. A van idles in the laneway. Vapor leaves in low white banners from its exhaust. 2 ratings lift the canister by its handles, breath fogging, boots crisp against wet stone. The lid lowers, bolts quarter-turn. The label with its polite falsehood faces outward like a smile that refuses to show teeth. In the office upstairs, Montague signs the last authorizations in a hand that is resolute without bravado. He writes a single sentence in his private notebook before he closes it. We borrow from death what war demands of the living. You do not see tears. You see a man coaching his conscience into endurance. Part 4. The Paper Soul. You return to the desk where the dossier breathes like a small animal sleeping. Its paper whispers when moved. Its corners have learned the ache of being thumbed. Here everything that seems unimportant is armor. A letter from a father, cordial, mildly critical in the way of men who cache tenderness in complaint. It mentions fishing on Sundays and a borrowed book never returned. It asks after church attendance with a sentence shaped to sound like a question and not a demand. The signature has a cramped tail on the last letter. The envelope flap carries 2 tiny fibers of someone's coat whose color cannot be named to anyone who will read it later. Perfect. A bank note that doesn't quite balance. A club chit with a grease bloom. 2 theater tickets clipped together with the absent-minded competence of a cashier. A dry-cleaning stub so soft along its fold it might have lived there 3 weeks already. A used match, spent and returned to the box by a man who saves unnecessary things out of habit. In the briefcase, the letters that matter. Senior men mention movements in a way that underplays the important and overplays the harmless. One uses a pet name for another that the Germans, who are good at so many things, will never think to doubt. There is a map with penciled arrows that does not swoop like an illustrator's flourish, but crosses terrain timidly, the way rail planning does before it learns to be bold. There is a date in the wrong corner, a file number out of conformity by a single digit, a careless coffee ring, human truth applied like varnish. Chumley reads it all aloud once like a prayer. Not for effect, for cadence. He listens to where the breath naturally falls. Deceptions that survive interrogation have music. Jean places the photograph into the wallet and says, almost to herself, "He looks like a man who would buy flowers and then spill the water on his shoes." The sentence hangs in the air, unnecessary and perfect. You realize they love him now, not the body on the slab, which would be sentimentality, but the person they have built in their hands. Love is too large a word, perhaps. Duty's tender cousin. The night arrives in the windows like an ink spill. The last act in the office is the smallest. Montague takes the fountain pen, dabs excess from its nib, and writes W. Martin on the inside of the briefcase strap. Barely visible, a habit mark. You think of how you have written your name inside things you feared to lose. Belief accumulates exactly this way, as small truths, layered until weight appears. He closes the case, listens to the lock settle, exhales. Somewhere down the corridor, a radio is tuned and tuned again and refuses to submit to a station, only static with a heartbeat hiding inside it. In the alley, a cat steps through puddles whose surfaces behave like film, silvered, slow. They leave the room as quietly as men leaving a nursery. Lights off. Door latched. Paper sleeps. The made life waits for the living sea. Days fold into each other like letters placed neatly into an outbox. The canister travels north by road passes signed out of existence, then south by rail whose timetables remember that war is the one customer who never complains and never forgives a delay. At the docks, men whose work is to lift and lower for pay that forgets them move the weight without asking what it is. The manifest is a story that does not sweat. Optical instruments. Always and again. You stand on the quay at dawn as HMS Seraph takes the canister like a promise it cannot tell anyone it has made. Her crew is average in the heroic way only average men can be. A petty officer scratches his neck, yawns, remarks about tea. A stoker thinks of a letter he should have written and did not. Courage lives comfortably in such bodies. It likes to be bored before it is needed. Montague watches departure from the place allotted to those who are no longer necessary. Plans are orphans the moment they begin to walk. For a time the world is only engines, rope, gulls, a cough, the clank in a pocket whose owner will never identify the coin by touch as well as he can now. London slides backward into smudge. The sea widens in the wind. He stands with his hands in his coat sleeves and the sentence he wrote in his notebook standing up quietly inside him, a guest who will not leave. We borrow from death what war demands of the living. You look once more at the life they made, the overdraft and the theatre tickets, the medal and the photograph with its small bruise of lipstick, the father who asks for church. It is complete in the way a weathered door is complete, true because it has been handled. The man who never was is ready. The morgue has emptied its cold light. The office has swallowed its own smoke. The canister rides the skin of water toward a latitude that will decide whether men meet their children again. And somewhere, as the submarine noses east through a seam of darker sea, the photograph in the breast pocket shifts the slightest fraction with the ship's roll, as if Pam, borrowed, imagined, necessary, has leaned in to listen to the ocean. The room where they made him is dark now. Only the map remains, pricked with its arguments and fears. A draft passes. One pin trembles, then is still. Outside, London exhales another night. Somewhere a violin is practicing a slow phrase through a wall too thin to keep secrets. The city will not remember this evening. The sea will. The man who never was waits inside a simple lie that has learned how to breathe. Chapter 3. The Drop. Part 1. The Long Night to Water. Night keeps its own clock at sea. Not hours and minutes, but the rhythm of engines and the tug of tide. The men aboard HMS Seraph feel it in their bones, a low hum travelling through steel into muscle, a lullaby with teeth. You're on the casing just below the conning tower, wrapped in a wind that smells of iron and brine. The horizon has no edges yet. It's a bruise of dark against darker. Far astern, the wake writes a white brief sentence and erases it. Below, in the forward space cleared for the cargo that isn't, a canister sweats cold. Dry ice smokes around the seal, slipping down like a ghost that refuses to lie still. The stencil says optical instruments with the stubborn innocence of a practiced lie. A petty officer taps the lid with the back of his knuckles, the way superstitious men touch door frames. He doesn't know what's inside, not really. Special, the captain said. Special is a word that keeps a crew obedient and a conscience unoccupied. Commander Bill Jewell checks his watch under a shielded torch. 4:02. He has done brave things and boring things, and he knows they are often the same in uniform. He hears the sea before he sees it, oil-smooth, patient, heavy with miles. A chart is pinned near the helm. A small pencil cross wears the name Welver in a clerk's hand. Neutral on paper, helpful in practice. Neutral is another word the war has taught men to distrust. Stand by to surface, he says softly. The order travels like a thought made muscle. Valves shift, ballast whispers, the hull rearranges its weight. You feel a pressure move through your jaw and into your ears, as if the sea itself is swallowing, preparing its mouth for a truth it does not want but will keep anyway. The Seraph breaks the skin with the tact of a predator who has learned patience. Hatches spin, cold air knifes through. Dawn has not arrived, only its rumour, a chalky thinning of night near the east. Jewell descends to the canister and rests a hand on its rim as if greeting a sleeping animal. All right, he says, to the men, to the metal, to fate. Wrenches bite. The lid loosens. Vapor exhales, sweet with the sterilized scent of laboratories and morgues. The interior gives up its quiet, a coat that remembers a tailor's iron, a chain that has forgotten its bicycle and learned the wrist, a face smoothed by time and water imagined. No one crosses himself. No one speaks a prayer out loud. But silence, here, is a liturgy that men conduct together without training. Part 2. The Ceremony Without Name. You watch as the crew receives instruction they didn't train for. They are practiced at torpedoes, at depth, at noise discipline. No syllabus prepared them for courtesy to the dead in darkness. They lift him with the kind efficiency of men used to moving weight. He is not heavy in the way of the living. He is specific, the kind of heaviness that teaches the hands something about consequence. Cloth whispers. The briefcase angles and bumps a rib of steel and makes a small sound that the night records and will never repeat. Jewell steps back, giving the few inches that mark respect. The chain's cuff is checked once more. A rating fumbles the key, catches it, looks secretly ashamed and a little frightened of something he cannot name. The captain's voice is low and level. Steady. It means everything at once. Weight, breath, the world. They carry him up the ladder, bodies twisting to make a corridor where none exists. The hatch mouth frames a slice of sky gone from coal to slate. The sea receives the Seraph like a confidant, Close, cold, complicit. On deck, the breeze runs through cloth and hair. The corpse lies along the rail a moment, facing a horizon he will not see, buttoned against a weather he will not feel. Pam's photograph rests over the quiet heart under the greatcoat. The lipstick bruise at its edge is now closer to salt than to skin. In the briefcase, letters with their small human stumbles, dates wrong in believable ways, salutations careless with rank in the manner of friends. It is astonishing, and right, that the smallest frauds tell the largest truths. The captain's mouth moves without volume. You cannot hear the words, but you can guess the tradition. A few lines learned in another life, when funerals belong to families and not nations. He stands with his hat in his left hand, the other touching the cold rail. One of the men bows his head. Not religious, exactly. Familial. On his mark, they ease the body over. For an instant, he balances on the edge of the world. One hand, one boot, the whole lie in a briefcase that gleams like a fish. Then gravity asserts its grammar. He drops, not hard, not loud. A low splash rolls outward, the sound of a secret choosing its first listener. The corpse rises, the sea negotiating, testing. The chain draws him again under and then up, letting the water decide the posture of belief. He settles into a drift the way papers settle in a file, by their own weight, by the desire of things to find their level. A gull lifts from somewhere, the wings beating once, twice, as if the air itself has remembered it as work. Part 3. The Three Shores. Across the water, a line of land waits without ambition. Spain is a color more than a shape right now, a deep graphite line with a promise scribbled beneath it. You cross-cut the way memory does when it tries to tell a story honestly. London first, a room with no windows, a lamp making a small island of yellow on an ocean of green bays. A telegraph operator flexes hands made arthritic by carefulness. The message sheet is clipped and waiting. Our friend has arrived. It does not exist yet. It is already true. Ewan Montague leans against a desk that has learned the slope of his palm. He looks at a clock he doesn't trust and the door he both hopes and dreads will open. Above his head, pipes tick as heat learns its route through a building that was never designed for secrecy and has become a cathedral of it. Spain next. Fishermen in boots that remember many winters. Nets drawn, rhythm older than nations. One sees it, a shape among weed and drift. He does not yet know the exact price of this morning. He knows the texture of death. They bring him to shore because that is what men do for other men, even when the state will eventually confiscate the gesture and declare it espionage. The Guardia's lanterns draw circles of authority on sand. A civil doctor bends over the body. His glasses bloom white with sea breath. He notes without emotion the plausible. Rank, cause, time. His pen scratches. A rosary changes hands and changes back. Somewhere in Welvar, a scribe sharpens a pencil that will put the date on the wrong day by accident and then cross it out. Even his mistake will help. Berlin finally. A desk that had belonged to someone very important before belonging to someone only important now. The paper arrives damp at the corners where the envelope was not true to discipline. A clerk lays it on blotting paper with the maternal care of those who handle consequence all day and sleep like stones. The first reader is not the final believer, but belief moves in him like a rumor hiring rooms. Sardinia. Greece. The words ring with the sound of the listener's prior desire. The map is already printed in his mind. The document is only the ink he needed. Back on the Seraph, the captain watches the drifting shape become a fact that no longer requires his attention. He nods once to no one. Ahead. The order takes. The boat turns in a curve as neat as a sentence written by a man who will not be edited. Foam peels away. The wake unfolds and is forgiven. Below, in the mess, a kettle ticks its way toward the question of boiling. The crew take their places without appointment. Mugs clack. Someone says something about a football side as if to repair the world. No one mentions what they just did. The silence they offered on deck has followed them down and sits among them like another rating, nameless, instructive. Part 4. The quiet that follows. Dawn at last. A grey that pretends to be light, but is mostly a lifting of obligation. The seraph grows smaller to the gulls and larger to the men inside her. That is how vessels behave when they have just done something a nation will never thank them for. On the surface now there is only sea. But the sea is never only. Currents write their slow letters. The body learns its grammar, turns toward a coast already rehearsing its role. The briefcase knows the path better than anyone, chain translating intention into geography. You look once more at the face, softened not by pity but by the work of elements. He is more himself as he leaves himself. Pam smiles against the heart. The ring sits where it should, shining enough to be found, but not enough to invite theft by a man who is still a man in a poor town in a poor year. In London, a door opens without drama. A messenger's shoes carry rain and dust, and the thing Montague has been breathing toward for weeks. The paper is small. The sentence is smaller. Body found. Papers recovered. It does not yet confess whether hands other than Spanish hands have handled them. Ambiguity here is mercy. Certainty is ambition. Both are dangerous. He reads it twice, then once more, hunting the music of the words for discord. He looks at Chumley, at that face which can be comic and severe in the same minute, and both men nod as if they have agreed to a principle that has not been spoken aloud. We will not celebrate. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. On the beach near Welvar, a priest rubs sleep from his eyes and finds himself rehearsing Latin whose meanings have lessened into syllables over a career of mornings like this one. He does not know he is blessing a weapon. He blesses the man. That is better. Berlin's first summary moves up a ladder of hands and titles. At each rung, certainty increases while knowledge remains the same. It is a miracle of organizations that belief rises faster than evidence. Someone pencils an arrow toward Greece. Someone else smiles with relief. Relief is the most credulous of emotions. At sea, the seraph is already otherwhere. The crew will remember this morning the way men remember certain breakfasts. Hot, quiet, nothing remarkable except that the day that followed would be. Jewel stands at the periscope later, not looking for the man. That would be folly, but looking because that is what captains do. He finds waves and the grammar of light and allows them to be enough. You stand at the rail that is no longer there. You watch a ripple that has already vanished. You listen to a prayer that was never recorded. You feel the world tilt a fraction of a degree toward a shore where boots will not land because other boots will. This is how mercy sometimes behaves in wartime, ungentle, precise, ashamed of itself, necessary. When the telegram reaches the room beneath Whitehall, Montague exhales the way a man does who has been holding a note too long for anyone to hear. He sets the slip down as if it were an eggshell carrying heat. He writes the time in the margin because order loves witnesses. He does not smile. He allows himself a single sentence in a book. He will never show another living soul. The sea has agreed. Outside, London is rubbing light onto brick. Milk floats in the bottlenecks like a pale coin. A constable stamps a foot against a cold that has outlived its invitation. The city continues, that faithful indifference. Nothing in its streets says, a corpse has just become a general. The calm after the act is not peace. It is a held breath with a shape. You can feel it, in the way the lamp hums, in the way a paperclip rests, in the way two men decide to say nothing and mean everything. And far away, the body turns once and then again, as if to take a last look at no one. He is not Michael anymore, though he bears him. He is not William Martin either, though the world will address him as such. He is a hinge. He is a door the war will open. The tide does the rest. It always has. Chapter 4. The Lie That Breathed. Part 1. The Fisherman of Welvar. The sea gives things back without warning. Some mornings it returns driftwood, sometimes drowned fruit, sometimes an argument it lost with the wind. On this morning, it gives a man. The fishermen of Welvar know the grammar of bodies, how they float, how they turn, how they pretend to sleep. They approach without fear, but with the courtesy reserved for the dead. The man's uniform glints under the early light. His hand is chained to a briefcase. The insignia reads Royal Marines. They shout toward shore. A bell rings. Two more men wade in, trousers rolled, ropes in hand. Together they pull him from the surf and lay him gently on the sand. His head tilts toward the rising sun, eyes closed as if already listening to the prayers being whispered nearby. The guardia arrives, boots crunching over shells. A notebook opens. A cigarette smolders between two fingers that have written this same report too many times. The words are familiar. Body recovered. Male. Likely aircraft casualty. A cross is made. A form signed. Duty completed. But the briefcase refuses to be ordinary. Its lock gleams. The chain's polish catches every curious eye. A sergeant shakes it, frowns, and orders it delivered to the British vice-consul. The dead man will be given to the sea again soon, they think. Until then, he waits under a tarpaulin that flutters like a tired flag. You stand with them, smell the salt, the rust, the cheap tobacco. Everything seems simple until it isn't. The sea, the chain, the papers, each is a door pretending to be closed. Part 2. The First Reading. In an office above a cafe, British Vice-Consul Francis Haselden adjusts his spectacles and peers down at the dead man's effects. Sunlight stumbles through half-closed shutters, painting his desk in uneven stripes. He has seen death before, but not like this. Crisp uniform, lettered documents, the whisper of significance. He scribbles a memo to Madrid, requesting guidance. Downstairs, the Spanish civil governor sips coffee and watches the British man through slatted blinds. Outside, Welvar is already talking. Fishermen, barmaids, clerks. The rumour becomes its own kind of tide. An English officer has washed ashore, carrying secrets. Haselden sends a note to the local admiralty and then another, unofficial, to London. Body recovered with private correspondence. Spanish authorities cooperating. He seals it quickly, as if afraid of its own truth. But the secret is no longer his to guard. By nightfall, a German attaché in Madrid will know everything. A photograph will be developed in a darkroom smelling of vinegar and promise. And soon, in an office 500 miles away, another pair of eyes will begin to believe. Part 3. The Chain of Custody. Madrid. A city half-starved, half-listening. The war comes here not with sirens, but with whispers, the elegant murder of truth conducted in drawing-rooms. Colonel Carl-Eric Kulenthal of the Abwehr receives the call. A Spanish contact reports that British papers have been retrieved from a drowned officer's body near Welvar. He doesn't smile. He lights a cigarette. He's been chasing ghosts for months. False trails, half-rumors, decoys. But something about this feels genuine. He can sense it in the tiredness of the voice on the other end. Men don't fake exhaustion. They fake enthusiasm. Secure the contents, Kulenthal says. Photograph everything. Send the originals to Berlin by diplomatic pouch. The papers make their slow pilgrimage north, from Spanish officers' hands to German intelligence, from smoke to smoke. Every step leaves a thumbprint of belief. In Berlin, Admiral Canaris reads the file twice. It smells faintly of salt. There are stains on the letter edges where C met ink. It is, in its imperfection, perfect. He nods to his aide. Prepare translation copies for the Führer. Elsewhere, other hands unfold the same sheets, tracing the familiar loops of British signatures, noting the informal tone between generals. It all feels real, because it is not trying to. A lie that wants to be believed tries too hard. This one simply exists. Part 4. The Believers. Hitler reads the file late one night in the Wolf's Lair, under a single bulb that paints his shadow across the map of Europe. The documents describe Allied intentions in Greece and Sardinia. Sicily, they imply, is merely a decoy. He circles Greece with red pencil. He circles it again. His staff murmurs. Some hesitate. But the Führer's conviction fills the room like smoke. The invasion plan he fears most, Sicily, suddenly feels safe. Troops are moved. Aircraft redeployed. A chain of decisions born from a corpse's pocket. Across the continent, in a London basement that smells of wet paper and tension, Ewan Montague receives a telegram. Spanish report. Documents reach German hands. He reads it once, then again. His pulse is steady. Chumley looks up from his desk. Do they believe it? Montague exhales through a thin smile. Not yet, he says. But they will. That night, he walks home through streets glimmering with blackout rain. Every puddle reflects the soft amber of a world that doesn't know what's just happened. He passes a newsboy shouting headlines about bombings in Italy. The war grinds on. But in the silence between headlines, history has shifted. Part 5. The Turning Tide. Sicily, July 1943. Dawn lifts itself over the horizon like an exhausted promise. The first Allied ships approach. The invasion begins. What they find is not resistance but confusion. German and Italian divisions positioned hundreds of miles away. The beaches, expected to be fire, are instead wind and sand. A corps in Spain has redirected an army. You see it now, the strange choreography of faith and folly. A fisherman's net, a diplomat's envelope, a general's pen, a dictator's belief. A body that never lived commands soldiers who will never know his name. In London, Montague receives confirmation. Enemy has accepted mincemeat documents as genuine. Operation successful. He sits very still. No cheers. No applause. Only the hum of an office fan and the faint smell of dust warming on the bulb. For once, the world will not see victory coming from the sky or the sea, but from imagination itself. He writes in his diary, "The dead man has done more for us than many of the living." Part 6. The Quiet After Truth. In Welvar, the grave is simple. A white cross, a name, a date. Major William Martin, Royal Marines. Locals leave flowers because someone should. The British send thanks that sound more like apologies. Pam's photograph remains in his file, folded neatly among papers now locked away. No one will see her face again until long after the war is over. Jean Leslie will live to old age, unaware of how many lives her smile saved. The sea reclaims its rhythm. Waves erase footprints, names, even guilt. But somewhere in its depths, the lie still breathes, moving quietly, endlessly, like current beneath calm water. You can almost hear it. The sound of pages turning underwater. The hum of typewriters that once dreamed of mercy. The slow, steady heartbeat of belief. Sometimes, Montague would later write, truth needed to drown so that men might live. And as the chapter closes, the tide folds one last time against the Spanish shore. A soft, eternal applause for the man who never was. Chapter 5. Ghosts in the Fields. Part 1. The New Front. The sea has played its part. Now the land must learn to lie. You wake beneath a pale English sky, the colour of unsharpened steel. In the fields of Kent, dew clings to grass like static. Wind passes through hedgerows carrying the thin smell of fuel, oil, and rain-soaked canvas. It's 1944, and the war has discovered its second voice, a whisper loud enough to move armies. Trucks arrive in silence before dawn. Men climb down wearing overalls instead of uniforms, painters instead of soldiers. Their brushes, hammers, air hoses. What they build isn't real, but it must look real to the eye of a German camera. A tank rises from rubber and air. A fighter plane blooms from wood and cloth. From a distance they are perfect. Up close they breathe differently, too soft, too clean, too patient. A corporal lights a cigarette and grins. Ghosts, that's what we are. He's right. The fields around him are haunted not by the dead, but by the living pretending to be something they are not. Operation Fortitude South has begun. Part 2. Invisible Architects. At Bushy Park, the deception planners meet beneath chandeliers blackened with soot from years of cautious light. The atmosphere is one part theatre rehearsal, one part military conference. The goal, to convince Hitler that the Allied invasion will strike at Calais, not Normandy. To build an entire army that doesn't exist, an army of paperwork, radio chatter, and clever arrogance. The chief illusionist, General George S. Patton, the loudest personality in uniform, suspended for insubordination, restored for reputation, he is now repurposed as bait. The Germans fear him more than any other commander. Therefore, he must remain visible. They will give him an army of air and rumour, the 1st U.S. Army Group, or Fusag. It will breathe across the southern counties of England, while the true invasion sleeps under cover in Portsmouth and Devon. Signals officers begin their work. Morse operators tap sequences day and night, creating the heartbeat of a phantom force. Each message authenticates another, looping endlessly in perfect nonsense. Code names, logistics, requisitions, an empire of fiction. Every truckload of rations recorded for men who will never eat. Every bullet accounted for to feed an army made of smoke. A sergeant jokes that if anyone bombs these coordinates, they'll only puncture air. The laughter is brief. Laughter in wartime often is. Part 3. The Landscape of Lies. From above, the deception is immaculate. Luftwaffe reconnaissance planes glide over Kent's patchwork fields. Their cameras blink like indifferent eyes. The photographs show everything Berlin hopes to see: tank formations near Canterbury, fuel dumps near Dover, pontoons stacked along the coast. Every shadow has been arranged for them, every illusion rehearsed until it looks effortless. On the ground, soldiers pose as mechanics. They move between dummy aircraft, polish nothing, wave at passing scouts as though signaling reality itself. The roar of engines comes from hidden loudspeakers that play a recorded orchestra of war. To any listening ear, the coast hums with invasion. To anyone standing among the props, it's a pantomime. At night, lanterns are placed under tarps to simulate campfires. The men gather around them out of habit, warming their hands over light that gives no heat. Overhead, the same stars that guided Mincemeat's corpse now watch this other illusion unfold. The earth answers the sea with equal cunning. A private scribbles in his notebook, "Sometimes I think the ghosts are watching us make them." He isn't wrong. The land, too, keeps its memories. Part 4. The Signal and the Silence. In a radio hut that smells of ozone and tea, a young operator named Arthur Bates sits before his set. His instructions are simple: transmit chatter, nothing important, everything convincing. He invents weather, deliveries, complaints about rations. Occasionally, he quotes scripture into the static. "Let there be light," he says, and the air obeys. Across the channel, German listening stations record his fiction with the reverence of scholars. Analysts translate his sentences into certainty. Tanks near Canterbury. Artillery massing east of Maidstone. Dates, names, call signs. All of it imaginary. All of it fatal in its consequence. Bates doesn't know that his fake messages will one day protect the soldiers in Normandy. He only knows the shape of exhaustion. The hours are long. The room is warm. He taps the key with the rhythm of a man praying by accident. Outside, wind combs through the grass and across the hulls of dummy tanks. The sound it makes is a sigh, the breath of an army dreaming itself into being. When dawn returns, the mist lays soft over Kent, blurring every line. A dog barks somewhere near an empty hangar. A sparrow lands on the canvas flank of an inflatable Sherman and rides it gently as it sways. From the sky, it will look perfect. The world believes what it needs to believe. And in this quiet theater of fields and fabric, belief is the only thing that kills. Chapter 6. The Generals Who Never Were. Part 1. The Man Made of Reputation. Every deception needs a leading man. For Operation Fortitude, that man was General George S. Patton. Flesh, blood, and theatre. A commander famous for his temper, his brilliance, his voice that could make fear stand to attention. Even in disgrace, he radiated inevitability. To the Germans, Patton was war in human form. To the Allies, he was the perfect ghost to command an army that didn't exist. You see him now, stepping from a jeep into the wind of a Kent airfield. His boots sink slightly into the damp earth. His riding crop hangs at his side like punctuation. Behind him, rows of inflatable tanks shimmer faintly in the morning haze. They salute him, as all good illusions should. Patton surveys his domain, the 1st U.S. Army Group, FUSAG, an army of painters, signalers, forgers, clerks, and shadows. He grins. If the enemy wants to see an army, let's give him one worth looking at. He knows his presence is performance. Each public appearance choreographed, every rumor seeded carefully. Newspapers whisper of his return to command. Allied press offices leak stories to reinforce the myth. The Germans, listening, record every word with hungry precision. A camera snaps. Patton turns toward it, chin lifted. The world's most dangerous decoy has taken the stage. Part 2. The Army of Paper. In London, a different kind of generalship unfolds, one conducted in ink. Colonel John Bevan and his team at the London Controlling Section construct an entire army on paper. Divisions with names, histories, insignias, even medical units. Every officer in this phantom order has a file, a salary, a record of conduct. There are letters between them, orders of movement, transfers, reprimands. Nothing is left unimagined. Railway clerks file requests for transport to non-existent depots. Paymasters sign checks for soldiers who will never eat. Quartermasters record rations for 150,000 men who have only ever lived in a filing cabinet. And above them all, a single typewriter key presses the future into shape. Fortitude South. Each false memo is designed to be intercepted. Each document a breadcrumb in the forest of espionage. To Berlin, they look like mistakes, and that is what makes them perfect. The best lies behave like accidents. In this world of ordered chaos, generals are made not by battle, but by rumor. It is a war fought in stationary cupboards and listening posts. A war where the stationary clerk becomes the quartermaster of destiny. Part 3. The Listeners. Across the Channel, in a room heavy with tobacco smoke and self-importance, German intelligence officers spread the latest aerial photos across a table. The images show rows of tanks, trucks, tents, and hangars, all where the enemy is supposed to be. One officer traces the outlines with his ruler. "Look," he says, "Fusag's build-up continues. Patton commands it himself." Another nods. They argue briefly over tonnage, divisions, fuel. No one questions the premise. In the corner, a young analyst clears his throat, mentions that the shadows of certain tanks look identical, that the spacing between units never varies. His superior waves him off. Patton doesn't make mistakes. Belief is a contagion. Once caught, it inoculates against reason. Outside the Abwehr building, Berlin lives in blackout. Trains carry soldiers east, not west. While on maps, the word Calais glows faintly like a candle behind parchment. The war has entered a phase where men no longer fight only for truth, but for the comfort of their own illusions. Part 4. The Voice of War. Night in Kent again. The wind carries a low hum, generators, radios, the murmuring of men rehearsing authenticity. A single radio hut glows dimly under blackout curtains. Inside, operators exchange invented orders. Transfer fuel convoy to Sector 3 by 0800. Inform General Patton inspection delayed due to fog. Acknowledge. Every transmission is recorded, decoded, and believed by someone who desperately wants to. From these fragments, the Germans assemble the orchestra of invasion. They can almost hear it, the crescendo of guns, the thunder of engines, the prelude to calamity. All of it played by invisible musicians. Patton visits one of the dummy camps the next morning. He walks between rows of rubber tanks, brushing dust from his gloves. To any distant observer, it's a general inspecting his troops. To the men behind the illusion, it's theater with the highest stakes imaginable. He tips his helmet toward a photographer. "Make sure they see the stars," he says, referring to the insignia on his collar, knowing full well those stars are worth more than the entire army they represent. Behind the lens, the shutter clicks like a trigger. That photograph will travel faster than any bullet ever could. By the time it reaches Berlin, it will be prophecy. Part 5. The Irony of Command. At a small desk in London, Ewan Montague receives a copy of the intercepted German communiqué. Patton commanding Fusag confirmed by multiple sources. Expect invasion at Pas-de-Calais. He laughs quietly, the kind of laugh that hides relief behind exhaustion. "They've learned nothing," he murmurs. Beside him, Chumley pours 2 fingers of whiskey. The men drink not to victory, but to absurdity, the strange grace of a world where belief kills faster than steel. Later, Patton himself is summoned to brief Eisenhower. He arrives in immaculate uniform, swagger intact. He delivers his lines flawlessly. When the meeting ends, he lingers at the doorway and asks, almost sheepishly, "Tell me, Ike, do I still get to be me?" Eisenhower smiles faintly. "You never stopped." That night, Patton writes a single line in his diary. "I've never led so many men I'll never see." Part 6. The Echo. From the cliffs near Dover, the sea looks endless, but the deception has boundaries as real as any coastline. Below, the wind stirs through dummy tents. Canvas ripples like breath. To the Germans, this shore will soon be the stage of their defeat. They just don't know which script they're in. You feel it, the symmetry with the corpse that floated months before. Different element, same idea. Imagination as weapon. Faith as fuse. Across Europe, 2 ghosts now guard the living. One drifting in the Atlantic's slow current, the other commanding armies made of air. The war has become a contest of belief, and belief, once ignited, is almost impossible to extinguish. The generals who never were fought the loudest battle no one ever saw. Chapter 7. The Phantom War. Part 1. The Dawn That Lied. June 6, 1944. The air smells of salt and static. You stand at the edge of a world that doesn't yet know it's changing. The channel lies beneath a bruised sky, quiet as a held breath. Below the waves, engines murmur, the slow pulse of the largest armada ever assembled. And yet, across the continent, the German High Command sleeps. Because they believe the story, the one written in London, rehearsed in Kent, the story whispered by Patton's shadow army. They believe Normandy is a diversion. They believe the real blow will fall at Calais. They believe in ghosts. The first paratroopers descend like seeds scattered by the wind. The beaches erupt in thunder, smoke, and prayer. But in Hitler's bunker, the red pencil stays poised over Calais. He waits. He waits for the army that will never come. The lie is doing its work. Part 2. The Weight of Conviction. In Berlin, morning arrives slow and reluctant. Teletypes chatter. Reports stack. The news of Normandy lands like a rumor, not a revelation. Invasion at Cannes. Small-scale landing. Possible diversion. Kulenthal frowns. He knows the name from somewhere, an unimportant coastal region. He glances again at the mincemeat files, now worn and faded. The handwriting, the familiar signatures, the comfort of old intelligence. He chooses belief. He must. The alternative, that the entire architecture of certainty was illusion, is too heavy to hold. He marks the report low priority. Sends reinforcements not to Normandy, but to Calais. Thousands of soldiers wait for enemies who have already passed them by. Faith can be an anchor. Sometimes it drowns you. Part 3. The theatre holds. Across England, the Fortitude machine keeps humming. Radio operators continue their transmissions. Dummy trucks roll at night to keep the illusion alive. Weather balloons carry foil cutouts to mimic aircraft on radar. Clerks draft memos announcing the arrival of divisions that never existed. Even after D-Day, the play must go on. The Germans must still see what they want to see. At a fake airfield near Dover, A private leans against an inflatable jeep, listening to the distant echo of real war. He doesn't know if he feels proud or foolish. He only knows that every bullet not fired at the men in Normandy is a victory. Above him, reconnaissance planes glide silently through the clouds, cameras blinking like indifferent eyes. From their altitude, illusion and truth look identical. Part 4. The Silence of Command. In the Wolf's Lair, Hitler stands over the map table, his uniform immaculate, his hand trembling ever so slightly. Normandy is a feint, he insists. The main assault will come at Calais. Hold the panzer divisions in reserve. His generals exchange looks that weigh loyalty against logic. None dare oppose him. The order stands. For 48 crucial hours, the tanks that could have thrown the Allies back into the sea remain idle, waiting for an army that does not exist. The room hums with the sound of maps dying. Part 5. The Real and the Unreal. At 6:31, on a beach codenamed Omaha, men step from landing craft into chaos. Bullets stitch the surf. The air is full of metal and salt. The sea, unbothered, carries both the living and the dead toward history. And yet, because of the lie, because of the phantom armies still breathing in the south, the beaches are not the slaughterhouses they might have been. The deception has bought them hours, and hours in war are measured in generations. Somewhere, a corporal clutches his rosary and whispers thanks. He doesn't know he's thanking ghosts. Part 6. The Echo Across the Channel. In London, the message arrives coded but unmistakable. The landings have succeeded. The enemy still expects Calais. Montague reads it aloud, voice steady but eyes glinting with something between disbelief and grief. Chumley pours whiskey into 2 chipped glasses. Neither man speaks. They drink in silence, not to victory, but to vindication. To the man who never was. To Patton's invisible soldiers. To the theatre that held long enough for truth to arrive by sea. Outside, the bells of Westminster begin to ring, hesitant, uncertain, as if the city itself fears to wake the dead too soon. Part 7. The Cost of Imagination. By August, the deception has done its work. The Allies push inland. France breathes again. The Fortitude camps are dismantled. Rubber tanks deflated. Wooden aircraft burned. The ghosts dismissed without ceremony. Patton rides east with a real army this time, leaving behind a landscape that once pretended him into existence. He never mentions the theatre again. He doesn't need to. The cameras did the talking. Montague, too, moves on. The files of Mincemeat and Fortitude vanish into locked drawers marked Most Secret. The world will not know how much of its freedom came from paper, ink, and imagination. Not for years. You walk one last time through the empty fields of Kent. The grass has grown back over the tire tracks that were never real. Wind moves gently through the stubble. It sounds like applause. In war, Montague once wrote, the truth is often too fragile to survive, so we taught it how to hide. Chapter 8. The Cost of Belief. Part 1. The Silence After Victory. Wars end differently for different men. For some, it's a parade. For others, it's a quiet room where the telephone finally stops ringing. You find yourself in London again, 1945. The blackout curtains are gone, but the habit of shadows remains. Dust drifts through a shaft of afternoon light in Montague's office. The desk is empty now, save for a locked drawer and a single pen that hasn't been used in months. On the wall hangs a map of Europe, pins removed, holes left behind like constellations of absence. The war is over, but peace feels like an imitation of something they once rehearsed. Ewan Montague reads the news. Germany surrenders. Hitler dead. The words feel thinner than they should. Victory, when it finally comes, makes no sound. He looks down at his hands, the same hands that once built a corpse into a legend, that wrote letters of love for a man who never lived, that turned fiction into salvation. And now, those same hands tremble slightly as he closes the newspaper. No cheers, no closure, just the weight of having been right. Part 2. The Afterimage. Charles Chumley returns to civilian life. He keeps the habits of secrecy, the way he lowers his voice even in cafes, the way he pauses before answering questions no one is really asking. He applies for jobs that require precision and patience, but he finds that normal work feels flimsy after the architecture of lies he once built. Jean Leslie marries. She folds away her wartime photograph, Pam, the smiling ghost who helped deceive an empire. Sometimes, late at night, she wonders whether the real woman behind the false identity didn't become more real than herself for a time. Love letters written for someone else's grief can haunt you, even when the ink has long faded. The city moves on. Posters come down, ration cards expire, and yet, in certain rooms, the air still carries the faint smell of carbon paper and cigarettes, the smell of belief manufactured by hand. Part 3. The Man Beneath the Lie. In Huelva, Spain, the grave still stands. White stone, black letters. Major William Martin, Royal Marines. Each year, someone leaves flowers. No one knows who. Perhaps a local woman who once saw the British officers tending the burial. Perhaps no one at all, and it's only the sea's own offering. Shells, driftwood, petals carried by tide. But the truth does not rest as easily. In 1953, long after the world stopped listening, a journalist begins to dig. He discovers that Major Martin was not a Marine at all, but a Welsh drifter named General Michael, a man who died alone after ingesting rat poison, unmourned, unnoticed. The revelation passes through newspapers like a shadow through water. People read it, shake their heads, move on. But to Montague, now older, greyer, it feels like an old door creaking open in a house he'd locked long ago. He visits the grave once, quietly, in civilian clothes. He lays a small bouquet and whispers the only apology he can manage. "You did your duty, old friend, better than any of us." The wind carries the words away before they can find an answer. Part 4. The Weight of Mercy. Years later, Montague is asked to speak publicly about the operation. The war has become history. Secrets have become stories. He writes his memoir with care, The Man Who Never Was, a title that hides as much as it reveals. He recounts the details that can be told, the idea, the planning, the body, the result. But he leaves out the nights, the smell of disinfectant and damp canvas, the feeling of his own pulse echoing inside the silence of a morgue. He doesn't mention the dreams, the ones where the sea speaks in a voice made of paper, where the dead man asks if he can rest now, where truth itself demands to be buried again. When the book is published, the public calls it brilliant, clever, a perfect example of British ingenuity. No one calls it tragic, but it is, because every brilliant deception carries the burden of those it fooled, and even the kindest lie leaves a scar. Part 5. The Ghost of the Machine. Elsewhere, in Kent, the fields that once held the dummy tanks have turned green again. Children play among the ruins of airfields. The echoes of engines have faded to myth. But beneath the soil, you can still find pieces of rubber, bits of wire, scraps of falsehood that once defended the truth. In Berlin, a museum displays intercepted documents, the same forgeries that once guided armies. Visitors pass by, whispering. Few stop to notice the handwriting. Fewer still understand that imagination, not power, won that war. The ghosts of deception remain loyal. They wait in archives, in sealed boxes labeled top secret, in stories told too softly to record. They are the proof that sometimes, to save the living, we must learn to love the unreal. Part 6. The Mirror. Ewan Montagu dies in 1985. His obituary mentions his wartime service, his books, his quiet sense of humor. It does not mention the man he borrowed from death, or the night he watched the sea accept a stranger. But maybe that's fitting. Some truths only live in silence. And so, the story loops back to you, to all who have ever believed or doubted, because Operation Mincemeat was never only about a corpse. It was about the fragile bargain between faith and fact, between what we see and what we need to see. In the end, every lie told for mercy becomes a mirror, showing us who we were and what we were willing to believe. He never lived, Montagu once said, but he died a soldier. The sea outside Welva still rolls against the shore. Waves write and erase his name, endlessly patient. Each tide brings something back, shells, kelp, silence, but never the truth, because the truth stayed with him. The man who never was remains exactly that, a reminder that imagination, once unleashed, can change the world, and leave it unable to tell whether it ever really woke up. Chapter 9. The Sea Remembers. Part 1. The water holds its own history. The sea keeps nothing forever, but it forgets nothing either. It is the only witness that never takes sides. You stand again on the Andalusian coast, where the sand is fine as flour and the wind smells faintly of oranges and salt. The tide moves in its old rhythm, forward, erase, return. Every wave whispers the same syllable, the one the world has forgotten. Still, out beyond the breakers, a fisherman's boat drifts in the same water that once carried a man called Major William Martin, and another man, General Michael, hidden inside him. The fisherman does not think about spies or wars. He thinks about nets and weather, about the price of mackerel, about the sea's mercy and its moods. But the water beneath his hull remembers every secret it has ever been asked to keep. Part 2. The Shape of Memory. Below the surface, the currents still trace invisible routes, the same lines that carried the canister in the spring of '43. Grains of sand drift in slow formation, tiny soldiers marching nowhere. The sunlight filters down in long gold spears that fade before they reach the bottom. If you listen, really listen, you can almost hear it. The hush of pages turning underwater, the sigh of paper dissolving, the ghost of a typewriter key pressed by a hand that no longer exists. Memory, here, is not a photograph. It's motion. The slow, endless choreography of forgetting. The sea remembers in patterns. A briefcase tumbling once. A chain glinting. A uniform sleeve caught in current. It keeps no moral. It simply keeps. Part 3. The Watchers. On the headland stands a memorial cross. White stone against the blue. Tourists stop, read the inscription, take photographs, move on. A few pause longer, trying to imagine the war that once stained even this quiet shore. Among them, an old man lingers. Perhaps he was a sailor once. Perhaps not. He traces the carved name, Major William Martin, and nods, as if recognizing an old acquaintance he never met. He doesn't speak. Some stories are beyond speech. Far below, a gull cries, the same high, lonely note that sounded when the corpse first floated ashore. The sound crosses decades as easily as air. Part 4. The Weight of Water. At sunset, the tide begins to rise again. The light turns copper, then bruised violet. The waves build, stretch, break, gather. Each one carries a reflection of the sky, and within each reflection, a moment of that old deception. A flash of uniform, a glimpse of chain, a brief ripple that might once have been a man. You close your eyes and the wind smells like diesel and ink and salt. The trinity of this story. You think of Montague walking home in the rain, of Jean Leslie folding her photograph into a drawer, of Patton laughing among his rubber tanks, of the thousands saved because someone believed in the unreal. The water rolls on, indifferent and infinite. It has outlived all of them. It will outlive you too. And still, somewhere in its restless heart, the sea remembers. Part 5. The Whisper. Night again. The stars return, scattered like forgotten coordinates. The sea glows faintly with plankton, the smallest lives giving light where there should be none. You stand at the edge of the surf. The water moves around your boots, then recedes, then returns, as if considering what to tell you. You whisper the name that was never his. It feels strange in your mouth, too heavy, too light. But the sea answers anyway, not in words, but in rhythm. Hush, hush, hush. You realize it's not the sound of waves. It's the sound of paper. Pages closing. The story has found its ending. But the ocean never ends. It will carry the lie forever, and in carrying it, make it truth. History is only memory that refused to drown. The tide reaches your feet one last time, and the moon writes a silver line over the surface. Epilogue. Echoes. The story ends the way all true stories end, not with a bang, but with a sound that fades and never quite stops. You're standing by the sea again. It looks the same as it did at the beginning, but you are not the same. You've walked through the corridors of deception, heard the whispers of men who lied for mercy, felt the pulse of a world built from ink and courage. The wind moves through the grass in slow applause. Distant bells drift from the town behind you. Somewhere, a child laughs, a sound too alive to belong to history. And that's the point, isn't it? That all this, the planning, the sacrifice, the imagination, was for life to continue making small, careless sounds again. In the hush that follows, you can still hear the old rhythms, the tap of typewriter keys, the shuffle of paper. the sigh of a tide carrying one more secret home. They layer together like heartbeats in another room. The sea remembers the man who never was. The land remembers the armies that never existed. And history remembers the truth made from both. Because that's what echoes are. The sound of something long gone, that refuses to stop being heard. You walk away from the shore. The water slides against the sand, leaving behind a trail that erases itself with perfect patience. Above, the sky deepens to a bruised blue, the color of silence before a story begins again. And somewhere, beyond the edge of sight, a single voice continues, not loud, not mournful, just steady, like the breath of the sea itself. You're listening to echoes of war,